Hey everyone, welcome. Today we are digging into something huge, literally a once-in-a-generation shakeup in Australian tax policy. We're talking about the end of the 50% capital gains tax discount. Now, if you're an investor, you know this has been the absolute holy grail since 1999, but the 2026-27 budget is completely flipping the script. In this explainer, we're going to break down exactly how this new system works, do the actual math, and figure out what it means for your wealth, your portfolio, and the Aussie housing market as a whole. All right, here is our game plan for today. We'll look at the big shakeup itself, why they're changing the system, how this whole indexation thing actually works, the really important fine print, some real-world math examples, and finally, the massive big picture effect this is going to have. Let's get right into it. Section 1, the Big CGT Shake-Up and the retirement of the 50% discount. Okay, so for over 25 years, the old rules were pretty straightforward, right? If you held an asset for over a year, you just slashed your nominal capital gain in half, a flat 50% discount, and paid tax on the rest. Super simple, but kind of blunt. Well, say goodbye to that. The new rules are tossing that out entirely. Instead, we're moving to a system of cost-based indexation paired with a brand new 30% minimum tax rate. And this only applies to your real gains. It's a massive pivot from taxing your on-paper growth to taxing the growth that actually outpaces inflation. Moving on to Section 2, why change the system? It's all about fixing market distortions. You've got to ask, why fix something that's been humming along since '99? Well, Treasury took a hard look and found some pretty glaring distortions that are basically holding the broader economy back. Check this out. When it comes to wealth generation, it is incredibly concentrated. The data shows an absolute massive chunk, 1/3 of all capital gains are realized by just the top 1% of income earners over their working lives. That's wild, right? So the tax benefits of the current setup are heavily skewed toward the top end of town. The government's take on this is that the old system essentially hands disproportionate benefits to the wealthiest taxpayers. And worse, it highly incentivizes them to just pump leverage into existing housing. This basically traps billions of dollars in already built real estate instead of letting that capital flow into things like new businesses, shares, or, actually productive, innovative assets. Look, the bottom line here is that the flat 50% discount was just arbitrary. Think about it. Depending on what the market is doing, that flat rate could wildly overcompensate you for inflation, or honestly, it might undercompensate you. Throw in the fact that more than half of all these gains are going straight to the top 10% of earners, and you've got a policy that makes it incredibly tough for younger generations to break into the housing market. In fact, this isn't even just a domestic idea. The OECD actually recommended cutting this discount and phasing out negative gearing on existing homes to fix Australia's tax system. All right, Section 3. Let's talk about how indexation actually works and taxing those real gains. Okay, if there is one thing you take away from this explainer, make it this concept right here. Cost-based indexation. Under the old way, you just took your sale price, subtracted what you paid, and boom, that's your profit. The new system is different. It takes your original purchase price and adjusts it for inflation using the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. Basically, the government is finally admitting that a dollar today just doesn't buy what it did 10 years ago. So you're only taxed on the actual real profit you make above inflation. You aren't getting taxed on the artificial bump that's just caused by the rising cost of living. But working hand in hand with that indexation is a new 30% minimum tax rate. Once you've done the math and found your real gain, again, that's the profit above inflation, this 30% kicks in as the absolute floor. Treasury explicitly says this is meant to level the playing field, making the tax you pay on asset wealth look a bit more like the tax everyday folks pay on the income they earn from their 9 to 5. Which brings us to Section 4, the fine print and exemptions. What exactly happens to the stuff you already own? We all know the devil is in the details with tax policy, so let's get crystal clear on the grandfathering rules. The timeline is super important here. The new rules only apply to capital gains that accrue after July 1, 2027. So if you've got investments right now, don't panic. Your asset keeps the old 50% discount on all the value it pulls up right until that July 2027 cutoff. To figure out what it's worth on that specific date, you can either get a formal valuation or just use the ATO's handy apportionment formula. They designed it this way on purpose so we don't see a massive panicked sell-off in the property or stock markets. And hey, you can take a massive breath of relief if you're stressing about your own house. Your main residence, the family home, is completely 100% exempt from this, untouched. Same goes for your superannuation, including self-managed super funds, totally exempt. Got legacy assets from before 1985, still exempt for any gains prior to July 2027. Oh, and to make sure we don't totally crash the housing supply, investors who build brand new homes get to literally choose between the old 50% discount or the new indexation method, whichever works best for them. Finally, if you're on income support, like the age pension, you don't even have to worry about that 30% minimum tax. You're exempt. All right, Section 5. Real examples and the actual impact. Let's look at the winners and losers when we run the math. Treasury gave us some fantastic case studies to really bring this to life. How this hits your wallet depends entirely on your asset's performance. Take Kate, for example. She is crushing it with a 7.5% annual return. Because her returns are blowing way past inflation, her real gains are huge. So, under the new rules, she's actually paying about $58,000 more in tax. Then there's David. He's getting a pretty standard 5% return. His tax bill goes up too, but it's much more modest, only about an $8,000 increase. But then we have Ben. Look at Ben's situation. He's only getting a 2.5% return. In the real world, that 2.5% is basically just treading water with inflation. Under the old blunt rules, Ben would have had to fork over more than $70,000 in taxes on what was essentially a phantom on-paper gain. But now, with indexation, because he hasn't made a real profit above inflation, his taxable capital gain drops entirely to zero. He literally saves almost $25,000 in taxes compared to the old system. So, what's the big takeaway from these numbers? It's that this new system is way more dynamic. It comes down hard on massive windfalls that outstrip inflation, but it actively protects everyday investors whose assets are just struggling to keep up with the cost of living. It's a fundamental shift towards taxing the true, real-world economic benefit of your investments. Finally, Section 6, the big picture effect. Let's zoom out and look at the macro impacts on the housing market. When we step back and look at what the government actually wants to achieve here, the first thing is revenue. By taxing these real gains more effectively, especially from high-yield investments, the government estimates they're going to raise a cool $3.6 billion over the forward estimates. And the budget specifically earmarks this cash to help fund ongoing income tax cuts for working Australians. But honestly, the housing market impact might be the biggest deal of all. Treasury modeling suggests that by stripping away these heavy investor tax distortions, the ones that historically push people into highly leveraged existing homes, the entire market dynamic is going to shift. They are projecting this will unlock the market enough to add 75,000 new owner-occupiers over the next decade. Think about that. That's enough to reverse roughly 10 years of declining homeownership rates among young people. And that brings us to the ultimate question for this explainer. The government is trying to pull off a massive structural pivot here by shifting the tax burden onto real gains, shielding the family home, encouraging new builds, and stripping away the incentives for the ultra-wealthy to just hoard existing real estate. They're aiming for a total rebalance. So, will returning to inflation indexation finally level the playing field for the next generation of homebuyers? I guess time and the market will tell. Thank you so much for hanging out with me to unpack this huge policy shift. Keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.